I'm Warren Spector, and I'm here today to talk to you about innovation, creativity, but within constraints. I'm really happy to be here and thankful to the organizers for having me. I only wish I could be there in person to meet with all of you and shake your hands and talk to you in the hallways as you do at an in-person event. But unfortunately, that's not possible. So I'll do the best I can to entertain and I hope enlighten you a little bit with my talk. So without further ado, let's get started. Here's my talk. So for starters, today I want to talk about creativity and innovation within constraints. But before I actually start talking about that, let me tell you a little bit about who I am, so you know who you're listening to. I've been working in games for a pretty scary 37 years, and I've worked for a variety of companies in that time, from tabletop games like Steve Jackson and TSR to digital game companies like you can see on the screen. In that time, I've worked on dozens of tabletop games, like the ones you see on the screen, as well as I think I'm up to 24 digital games now, including the Serpent Isle and System Shock and Deus Ex, among others. I've had the chance to write choose your own adventure books, one novel, and a series of comic books, all of them thankfully out of print because my writing skills probably don't warrant that sort of work. I've done startups and worked on epic fantasy role-playing games and modern-day ninja games with directors like John Woo, none of which came to fruition because my startup was acquired by Disney Interactive Studios, where I made Epic Mickey and Epic Mickey 2. Leaving there, I actually gave teaching a shot, where I created the curriculum, hired staff, did a bunch of lecturing about creative and production leadership, giving talks not unlike the one that I'm giving today. But after that, I realized that there were still games I wanted to make. And so I joined Paul Neurath, the founder of Looking Glass Technologies, in an independent studio called Otherside Entertainment. So that's me. I've been around the block a few times, done a lot of stuff. Hope that gives me some credibility here as we talk. So here's my agenda for today. I want to talk some definitions about how to maximize creativity and innovation within constraints. I want to talk some process issues about how you pull that off. I want to introduce you to something I call the creative box, which I think will probably have you thinking I'm crazy, but we'll find out. And then offer some conclusions and end by giving you either the best or worst advice you've ever been given in your life. So let's see how this goes. For starters, first things first, who doesn't want to innovate? I'm going to take it as a given that everybody in this virtual room is creative and that all of you want to innovate in some ways. I mean, who wouldn't want to? First quote here of the day is from a guy named Ted Hope. I love his book, Hope for Film. I love it. And you're going to be hearing a lot from him today. But this first one here, most of us enter the film business with the goal of doing something great, maybe even changing the world. He's talking about film, of course, but I think that applies equally to the game business. Sadly, that impetus to change the world fades pretty quickly as reality sets in. There are all sorts of pressures on developers that newcomers to the field may not be aware of, though veterans in the audience are all too familiar with them. There are time pressures. Work always expands to meet the available time, and then some. There's never enough time to accomplish everything you wanted to do, what you dreamt of when you were conceptualizing a game. There are always money pressures. Same thing. There's never enough of that. You're always going to run out of money before your dream comes true. There are team pressures. You may discover that you don't have the right people to realize a vision. You may discover that your team is scared to death trying to reach for the stars and pushing back, wanting to stick with convention. And there are always publisher pressures. I mean, frankly, the publisher probably creates all the other pressures, but that's another talk. Okay, but despite all that pressure, I'd argue that there's a need to push back, to try to do new things, to advance the state of the art. I'm trying to figure out what this interactive and immersive stuff is all about. We've barely scratched the surface of what we can do and what we can be. If you think we've mastered the art of engaging players in a medium that frankly requires work on their part to find their fun, you're not really paying attention. And finally, there's the real possibility of change these days. We have tools at our disposal that are pretty remarkable. So animation director Glen Keane used to be at Disney for many years. He says something about animation that applies to games even more, I think. This art form can grow and become so much more than it is, he says. I still have a dream of what if Rodin was alive today, or Michelangelo, and you gave them the art form of animation, but did not show them anything that had been done before. Where would they take it? So the question I ask is, where our Rodin or Michelangelo? Anyone who thinks that game designer has come along already isn't paying attention. The key is you can still make a difference in determining what we can and should be. It's possible that one of you is our Da Vinci. So we have the opportunity, and I'd argue the need to innovate, which to me, frankly, means we have almost a moral obligation to do that. Why does this matter to you as developers? Again, I'm back to Ted Hope. You need to read the book Hope for Film, obviously. He says something really smart. Am I going to make another movie like everybody else's? Imitating what's gone before is sad. It can even be soul crushing, at least to me. And I suspect and hope, as it were, it's soul crushing to many of you as well. And from a more personal or studio perspective, innovation sets you apart from everyone else. Being memorable is a good thing. Being unique, having what Hope calls a signature, is a key component in the quest for innovation. So what are we talking about here? What do I mean by innovation? Let me try and define this. Usually when people talk about it, this is what they say. They talk about revolution. They talk about something entirely new. They talk about something that influences other developers or gets players thinking about games in new ways. In other words, they talk about something that changes the world. And that can be the case. Some games have accomplished all of those things. Wolfenstein 3D showed the world the power of first-person perspective, real-time, fully textured worlds. Though I would like to point out somewhat selfishly that Ultima Underworld shipped before Wolfenstein 3D. It just didn't quite make the same splash that Wolfenstein did. Not that I'm bitter. Anyway, The Sims offered, dollhouse gameplay that no one had experienced before. Minecraft set new standards in construction games and free-form creative games. And Ultima Online, I would argue, was the first MMO that had a real impact on the world. There are many more like that out there, and you can come up with your own list of truly, fully, all the defining elements, creative, innovative games. But does a game have to have all of those things to be creative and innovative? Obviously, the fact that I asked that question tells you how I feel about that. The answer is no. Games don't have to do all of those things to qualify as innovative. They don't have to do all those things for you to show off how clever and creative you are. So at risk of letting my ego run wild, let me use one of my old games to make a point. Lots of people have said that Deus Ex was an innovative game. But if you dig beneath the surface, you'll find that there's nothing really new in it. The major new thing Deus Ex did was combine elements of already existing genres to allow players to chart their own course through the game. So, how do we want to define innovation? I'd say this is a more realistic definition. Innovation is something unexpected, something that surprises players in some way. It's something fresh and unlike other games in some noteworthy way. It's something that reveals new aspects of the medium that haven't been exploited as effectively before. And maybe even something shocking in its originality, however that's achieved. That can be technology, that can be graphics, that can be narrative, or it can be just an idea like Deus Ex. Again, Hope says something that needs to be said. A film or game needs some moment of audacity, the kind of thing that people will talk about and that might even shock the uninitiated. Shocking the audience with your audacity. That's a great way to think about innovation. And getting people talking is a great way to measure whether you've succeeded. Needless to say, whatever your definition of innovation is, it isn't easy to deliver it. And to do so, one of the first and most important rules is that you have to know the conventions of whatever kind of game you want to make. The conventions of various genres is a whole nother talk, so we're not going to get into that either. Just take it as given that you need to know what's come before. You have to be a bit of a historian, and you should be playing games, obviously. I don't need to say that. Make sure you're playing games to see what the competition is up to. There's a guy, Gregory Bateson. He was an anthropologist and a social scientist and a linguist and a semiotician and a cyberneticist. Talk about something to aspire to. Be like Gregory Bateson. He was quoted in John Cleese's book, Creativity, as saying, you can't have a new idea till you've got rid of an old one. You have to know the old ones before you can deliver new ones. And Hope again, creativity is about seeing patterns and then finding a way to differentiate from the standard conventions. Differentiating and breaking rules is critical if you want to be seen as an innovator. And Glen Keane again, here's maybe the best reason to understand conventions. You need to know what people think is right, hear the air quotes there, before you can come up with a new definition of right. When you come across something in your artistic path that feels like it's out of place, like where the heck did that come from? Lean into it. So lean in and break things if you want to innovate. Those are some definitional thoughts. Let me talk now about why innovation is particularly important to me right now. Simply put, the current state of the art, there are some quality games being made, obviously, but innovation rarely comes from big publishers and studios with proven franchises and traditional gameplay tropes and, game name fill in the blank number 17. There are exceptions, of course, but I would argue they're few and far between. There are lots of numbered games out there. But on the indie side, the A level and double A level as opposed to triple A, there are some opportunities to change things because the budgets are small and risks are relatively low. So indies are in a great position to do shocking things. But wherever your game falls in terms of budget, scope, and reach, there are undoubtedly fewer barriers to entry than ever. If you have an idea, there are tools to help you realize it. There are a variety of ways to get your game in front of an audience. And there are so many business models to make money, I can't even keep track of them all. That's all a relatively new thing, all of those opportunities. And those could, and I would argue should, lead to a flowering of new ideas. So remember, innovation is unexpected, fresh, revelatory, or shocking. So definitions, great. Timing, great. What else do we need to talk about? We need one more thing, and that's how you create and innovate. Now, I don't have all the answers. No one does. But here are some things I've found useful over the last 37 years. Obviously, you need an idea. But to showcase your creativity, And to have a chance to change things, you need more than an idea, you need the idea. So how do you come up with that? Here are some thoughts about that. Requirement number one is, innovation is hard. You really have to want it. And you need a clear vision to have any chance of success. And you need a clear definition of success. It isn't every day I get to quote a retired race car driver, but he said, desire is the key to motivation, but it's the determination and commitment to unrelenting pursuit of your goal that will enable you to attain the success you seek. You need to want it. You need to find that one idea. You need to want it badly. And you need to know what success looks like if you want to do more than just seek it. Requirement number two, I would argue you need frustration. You need, frustration is a great place to start. Let's just say that. I think about it this way. What makes you scream in frustration as you play other people's games? What gets you asking, usually at the top of your lungs, why did they do that? My wife will tell you that when I play games, I spend probably a half my time having fun and a quarter of my time analyzing what's going on and a quarter of my time screaming at the screen. Screaming at the screen will usually lead to ideas about how you would do things differently. Next, iteration. You need to be willing to try things over and over again. You need to be enthusiastic, not just willing. You need to be enthusiastic about throwing work away. Now, this on the screen is received wisdom. I can't tell you where it came from, but it's wisdom nonetheless. You want to concept and prototype lots of ideas. Now, most of them are going to be bad or aren't going to work. But if you're lucky, one, maybe two of them will work and will be worth pursuing. John Cleese again, here's some good advice. You can't possibly know if you're going down a wrong avenue until you've gone down it. If you want to find the idea, you'll go down lots of wrong avenues before you hit on the right one. Requirement number four, I probably shouldn't have to say this, but remember that we're making games. We're not curing cancer. We're not bringing world peace. We're just making games. And in that context, it's important to have a childlike outlook that will help you come up with those, 100 ideas I mentioned earlier. You want to play the way kids do. You want to lose yourself in your work. I mean, if you don't lose yourself in your work, how do you expect other people to? You want to be curious and don't assume you know everything. Games are about their rules, but conceptualizing them shouldn't be. Don't believe anyone who uses the phrase, you have to. Be willing to screw up. You're going to make mistakes. That's great. And the word shouldn't be part of your vocabulary. Think like a kid. Requirement number five, this may seem obvious, but you need to do more with your life than play games. I've had plenty of people come to me, many of them looking for jobs, and their major job, not requirement, but the thing they think makes them qualified for the job is they play games all the time. Well, it's great to play games, but if that's all you do, you're not going to be a very interesting person. You're not going to come up with very interesting ideas. You want to read. You want to watch movies. You want to listen to music. You want to engage with as many aspects of your culture as you can. Do it for your own enjoyment. Do it so your team members will want to be around you. If for no other reason, do it so you know what people are into right now. So you can make games that address those interests instead of you having to convince them to be interested in what you're interested in. Very important. Sad as it may be, you're eventually going to run up against obstacles. But at this concept stage where you're trying to find that one new idea, don't worry too much about constraints. Eventually, you're going to have to deal with time crunches and budget limitations and all of that. But thinking about that too early is just going to kill your enthusiasm and your creativity. You want an unfettered mind, willing and able to go wherever it wants. You need to have a mission. This is really important to me. By mission, I mean something you believe in about games, something that's reflected in some way in all the games you make. You want to stand for something that sets you apart from other developers. For me, the mission is to empower players to tell their own stories through their choices made during play. I want to capture that feeling of what I call shared authorship that you get when you play Dungeons and Dragons. It's pathetic that a 37-year-old career is about making people feel like they're playing D&D, but there it is. In 2 words, my mission is play style matters. How you choose to play makes a difference. So that's my mission. Figure out what yours is. Above all else, do your own thing. You need to be the thing that no one else but you can add. Okay, number 8. I get in trouble when I say this. I mean, who wants to make enemies? But to be clear, I'm not talking about making an enemy of a specific person or hating on a specific game or company. I'm talking about something else. I'm talking about having something to prove to the world. I needed someone or something to rally against, something I could prove was wrong. Those chips on one's shoulders can act like rocket fuel. That's more what I'm talking about. Having a little, I'll show them what games are all about, will drive you to accomplish things you never thought you could accomplish. Take that frustration I mentioned earlier and amp it up. I remember when I was back at Origin, I used to think, I'll show Richard Garrett and Chris Roberts what interactivity is all about. And it was a little arrogant, I guess, but it forced me to develop my own ideas about what interactivity was all about. So have an enemy. Get buy-in. You better have a team that can help you find your big idea because you're not going to find it on your own. You need a team that buys into the need for change and the desirability of vision, of your vision. Without that, you are doomed. You need a team that wants to go where no one's gone before, that wants to make the specific game with the specific new idea you want to make. They need to see the value of that one true idea, the innovation you're trying to deliver, or you're going to fail. Get buy-in. So, okay, we're gonna keep going, but before we do, you need to want to innovate and have a picture of what that looks like. You need to find what frustrates you and revel in it. You need to try 100 things to find the one that matters. You need to play like a kid. You need to do more than just play games. You need to ignore constraints. You need to have a personal mission. You need an enemy, something to push back against. And you need everyone involved in the project to buy in. If you get all of those things, you're well on your way. Now, okay, so here's a commercial break before we move on. I assume most of you have more ideas than you know what to do with. But if for some reason you don't, I love this stuff, Oblique Strategies, Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt. They came up with a set of cards that have these really off-the-wall, basically random thoughts on them. And it could be just the thing to get your creative juices flowing in the big sense, but also in a minute-to-minute sense. If you're blocked or something, you may want to try this. It's a useful exercise. Okay, end of commercial break. Sorry. So let's talk about teams and leadership and how they play into the process of maximizing creativity and innovation. Very few teams are capable of self-organizing around a democratically determined goal. In most cases, I'd argue all, frankly, but that's just me. Someone has to be in charge. Someone has to make sure things are heading in the right direction, that the team is working on the right things, they're delivering on agreed upon goals. So who is that? Well, the answer is easy. Every game needs a director, whether you call them a game director, a creative director, a lead designer, whatever. There's one person who designs the game, tells people what to do, says whether the work has been done properly, and ultimately makes all the creative decisions. That's right, isn't it? Well, obviously that's completely wrong. Anyone who believes that has never worked on a game. It flat out doesn't work. I actually know people who've tried it, and it's resulted in really unhappy teams. and unhappy teams rarely make great games. The fact is, your team, whether you're a lead or just an individual contributor, your team is smarter than you are. And limiting their input limits the creative limits you can push and ensures that your innovation either isn't very innovative or doesn't work at all. So everyone's creative. Just remember that. Everyone has and loves to share ideas. Everyone thinks their ideas are great. And the most important thing is sometimes they're right about that. But all that being said, there are dozens of games you could make based on any concept. There are any number of great ideas that sound good on paper and are fun in prototype form, but not every great fun idea fits with all the other great ideas you and the team come up with. That's where what I call the creative box comes in. And note that this is a term that I use, that my students heard, that some of my team members understand. But if you talk to other people in the industry, they will not know what you are talking about. So you either have to not use this term and come up with your own, or you need to educate them. Whichever one you want. So what the heck is a creative box? And what does it have to do with creativity and innovation? Well, a creative box determines which of those great ideas you and the team come up with fit with all the other great ideas you've come up with. The box's borders determine what belongs in a game and what doesn't. More specifically, the creative box is a lot of things. It's a set of parameters that establish loose borders of things that make sense in the context of the game you're making, loose borders. Those parameters make the constraints understandable and tangible. They're not just abstractions, they're literal. They're about harnessing the power of the team, not squashing creativity, but harnessing it so all that creativity adds up to something coherent. And believe it or not, those parameters, being concrete, tangible, and harnessing, can drive decisions throughout development. But right about now, you're probably thinking I'm crazy. Boxes aren't liberating, they're confining. And innovation is always described as thinking outside the box. So am I just nuts? No, well, maybe. But stick with me and decide for yourself. For just a few minutes, I want you to think about thinking inside the box of parameters, constraints, and harnesses. So what's the first step in creating and defining this creative box? The first step for me is to conceptualize what I call commandments and pillars. Now this one, again, these are me terms, not industry standards. Other people call them pyramids. Some people call them bullseyes. Everybody has some way of thinking about this. But I call the constraints and parameters commandments and pillars. So these are the things that define the creative box, and the box defines the constraints that you want to impose on the team. I don't really care who comes up with them. If that's a director, great. If that's the entire team, I mean, frankly, I wish you luck, but that's also great. Someone has to come up with them. And remember that they're concrete. You want them driving as many development decisions as possible. They're practical, day-to-day useful things. And if not, they're a waste of time and you shouldn't bother. But so far, I've been talking abstractly about things I say have to be concrete. So let me talk about some examples. I'm going to use Deus Ex again. It released 20 years ago, which amazes me. But it still can, I think, make my point. So here are the Deus Ex pillars. These are ideas the team and I came up with as we were starting to think about the game. Not a year into development, not 2 years into development, right from the start. We knew this going in. It's a genre mashup, an FPS, a stealth game, and an RPG, not just one of those things. It was, to some extent, designed to confound marketing people. I love doing that. Don't tell them. Well, I already told them, I guess this is public. Anyway, Deus Ex was a tough game to market, and I have immense respect for the people who did it. The second one is I envision the hero as James Bond, a guy who believes in right and wrong in a world that's all shades of gray. It was built around the idea that every conspiracy people believe to be true is in fact true. It was about what it means to be human, that technological enhancement, human augmentation, threatens to overwhelm our humanity. So, what does it mean to be human? And a little later on, we actually came up with this last one. There were going to be multiple end games based on how players played. Remember, I said earlier, playstyle matters. And I wanted that to be reflected in the whole game, not just in the minute to minute where players had different experiences that they authored themselves, but in the end games as well. So multiple end games. Those are the pillars. They're not exactly rules, okay? The pillars are about setting tone and context. The commandments are in fact rules, okay? They're specific and they're gameplay related. So I'll go through these really quickly. Obviously, this is too many words on a screen, but always show the goal. How to do something, in my mind, is fun. Figuring out what to do is not. You're not allowed to say the word puzzles in my studios. Puzzles imply single solution things that show how clever and creative a designer is. At my studios, we create problems, challenges that can be solved however the player wants. Maps are interconnected. Locations are reachable in a variety of ways. It gets back to solving problems the way you want. There's no forced failure. I hate it when games force you to fail in the interests of a story. The story of the game is not what I want to tell players. It's what players want to experience through play. If there's something cool to do, let players do it. Don't have NPCs doing cool stuff. You want to reward players regularly. Players are going to get better at playing your game as they understand the rules of the game. Make the game more challenging as you go. If players are not looking up and down and sideways and at an angle, you're not thinking 3D. Why make a 3D game? Gameplay relies on a variety of tools, not just a gun. Okay. And speaking of guns, combat requires thought, and it's never required. There's always another way to solve the problem besides fighting. And the overall mood of the game is going to be consistent and dark. Okay. So all of those are the rules of Deus Ex. I hope you can see that there's plenty of room for innovation in these rules. Some of them state the obvious, or they exist within common conventions. Some of them imply something new and different, like an unusual combination of genre elements, or combat being just one approach and not always the best one, and so on. In any event, if a decision contradicts one of the pillars or commandments, it's a bad decision no matter who thought up the great idea. Your one new thing has to fall within those pillars and commandments, not contradict it or fall outside of it, falling outside of the box. Now, an interesting effect of clear pillars and commandments is that no one person has to make every decision. You can be sure that that all-powerful and incredibly ineffective director I mentioned earlier doesn't have to exist. Team members can exercise their creativity within those constraints. The pillars and commandments are the constraints. But as long as an idea fits within the confines of the box that's defined by those pillars and commandments, team members are basically free to do whatever they want. They can even propose new box borders, and they will, trust me. So how do you create them? And how do you use them during development? That's going to be a little different on a small team. Define that however you want. I would say 5 to 10 or less. It's going to be a little different than on a big team, which, call it 10 or more. On a small team, team members kick off the project together typically. It's that fun part of the process where all that matters is, wouldn't it be cool if? Everyone brainstorms together to dive a little deeper into the idea. You refine and agree on visions and goals together. You codify the pillars and commandments. Get them on paper. Post them around the office as posters if you're actually in an office. Make them available somewhere online if you're in a virtual office like we all are today. You want people thinking about them all the time. That's the key, all the time. And then in a small team, the team self-regulates during execution. Everyone is empowered to identify ideas and implementations that fall outside the boundaries of the box and can call people on them. That's on a small team. Some of you might not like what I'm about to say, but on a big team, I think things have to go differently. A group can still kick off the project, but the core idea often comes from just one person who gets to say, wouldn't it be cool if? Or here's the kind of game I want us to make. I started thinking about Deus Ex in 1995, and I had a picture in my head of what that game was going to be. And that was the game I was going to build a team to make. So sometimes on a larger team, one person gets to kick it off. A group, often a small one, but sometimes the whole team, brainstorms and provides input to flesh out that wouldn't it be cool if, that fleshes out the core idea. One person, usually a director, takes all of that outside input and refines the vision and goals. This person communicates a final draft of the pillars and commandments. And here's where it gets tough. That person has the final word. I think of it this way. There has to be one person, especially on a large team, who has one more vote than everyone else combined. Because you need decisions made, and someone has to make those decisions. But the key is, if you've got the right pillars, the right commandments, the right creative box, if you ever have to use that one extra vote, it's your failure as the director, as the leader of the team, and not the team's failure. It's always your failure. Now, those last two sound exactly like what I said earlier you shouldn't do. Have one person make all the creative decisions. But that isn't the case. So how does a director or engaged team member get people to buy into those pillars and commandments? How do you keep them inside the box? Well, let me start with how not to do it. A bad director on a large team doesn't do the necessary things to craft that useful box. A bad director, this is obvious, decides badly. They don't involve others. They don't make clear decisions. They're indecisive. They communicate badly. They know what they want, but they can't communicate it. They just assume everyone gets it. And they engage badly. They provide infrequent feedback. They say no instead of engaging people in making that decision. They micromanage. I have literally seen a director look over an artist's shoulder and say, make that pixel blue, not green. That is bad direction. Now, a good director guides. Now, by guiding, I mean, says, here's what kind of game we're going to make. Sets high-level ideas. They involve people right from the brainstorming phase with anyone on the team who's interested. They sift ideas for quality and fit. They create and consult a respected brain trust, sort of like Pixar does. On Deus Ex, I had several people outside the company. You should never tell your publisher you're doing this. But outside the company, play the game and evaluate design documents and that sort of thing. And tell me when things sucked. Create that brain trust. It can be within your company if you're concerned. But create and consult that. Go back to the team, critical. Go back to the team and give them a chance to improve on your ideas, on their ideas. And only then do you make the call and solidify the commandments. Okay. So how does guiding look? You articulate the desired result. You don't articulate the details of implementation. You delegate the implementation. The team always owns the details. You establish criteria for judging work, not just quality, but fit, so people can stay in the box. And then you nudge outliers. You don't berate them. You don't yell at them. You nudge them back in the box when they introduce ideas or details or solutions that don't fit with the game you want to make, that don't fit within those pillars and commandments. So how do you do it? Well, obviously you do lots of talking with your brain trust and with the team. I've used tone videos and inspirational images and concept art as great tools for communicating feeling and tone, not implementation details, again, feeling and tone. Unlike most people in the business these days, I actually believe in vision docs and word Bibles, world Bibles, and all those other documents. I wish people would read them. And then, of course, you have your pillars and commandments. You want them posted everywhere. Again, I can't stress that enough. You want people thinking about them all the time. You want your partners to know about them. And they make great things to talk about when you're doing your postmortem at GDC or at a conference like this one. So here's the deal. This is pretty cool and a little scary, but if you define the right creative box, you can basically, as a lead or a director, sleep through development because you'll know the team is going to do the right thing because you've told them what the right things are. So this isn't literally true, but if you're guiding correctly, I really mean it when I say you're going to have days when you come into the office or you get on a Zoom call and you wonder what it is you're supposed to be doing. When that happens, you have totally succeeded. You have your team guided, heading in the right direction, implementing that one true idea. It's a magical feeling when you wonder what to do. So one last thought about boxes, constraints, creativity, and innovation. The TARDIS is an excellent example of a box that's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. That's the way to think about a creative box. Your pillars and commandments are, as I've said ad nauseum today, they're parameters, not handcuffs. They unleash creativity, not eliminate it. They inspire your team. They get them excited. The box gets them all pulling in the same direction if you've done it right. I know that sounds like the end of the talk, but that's not. Once you have a solid creative box and you've got those pillars and commandments, there are a few more things to think about if you're going to innovate within constraints. Some of these are probably going to be obvious. Much of what I've said today is probably obvious, but I hope there's some interesting and new lessons here. First one, get out of your comfort zone. If you already know how to do something, that isn't innovation, it's imitation. Even if you're imitating yourself. Innovation is new, it's risky, it's even scary. So be sure you are scaring yourself and everyone else around you. I said it before, I'll say it again. Find the one new thing. The idea I mentioned before made real and tangible through prototyping and implementation. Now, you're probably saying, well, I don't have the freedom to do that. I'm not, some legend of game development. Well, that's nonsense. You can always find one new thing in any game, whether it's an original property, a sequel, or a license. There's always the opportunity to find one thing. But be careful. Innovation is risky. Things might not work out. So stick with one new thing, maybe two. If you go for three or more new things, you're trying too hard and you're likely to fail at all three of those things. So understand and mitigate risk by always having a fallback plan, but always find that one new thing. This is kind of crazy, but I totally believe it. Be willing to ignore everyone, partners, team members, playtest data, reviewers, everybody. If you're really doing something new, no one knows how it'll work out. Everyone told me to ditch stealth in Deus Ex. They said only a fraction of people are going to sneak. But the option to sneak was critical. It was a pillar and a commandment. So I said no. Stealth was going to be part of the game. Ignore everybody. Hugh McLeod wrote a book called Ignore Everybody, interestingly enough, where he said, the more original your idea is, the less good advice other people will be able to give you. You don't know if your idea is any good. Neither does anyone else. So be courageous, be confident, be a little selfish. Don't be stupid, but be brave. You want to empower the team. I probably made this point enough times that you get it. Empower your team. The key thing here is, remember, they're going to make you look good if you let them. Just keep them in the box. If they stray from it, start making a different game than the one you agreed on, nudge them back in, but don't micromanage. If you're a director, you have a great deal of authority. If you're a lead, you have a great deal of authority. But again, using that authority means you've failed. Time. Take your time. It's both a friend and an enemy. You never know. I mean, you know there's never enough time to make a game. But having said that, take whatever you've gotten or been given. Why make any decision before you absolutely have to? Now, you need to know when absolutely have to is, but the more time you take, the more likely it is that you and your team are going to come up with new information and new ideas that fit in the box or cause you to change and expand the box. Now, make sure you're not willfully and consciously going past your deadlines. Both your team and your partners have to trust you, but take the time you've been given, as much time as possible. Now, I don't know who said this first. There are too many people who've said it for me to say, but kill your babies. Kill your babies. If an idea isn't working, jettison it quickly. I worked on one project where I got married to an idea. It was a game system that I saw as the one new thing in the game. The first iteration didn't work. I concepted it, we prototyped it, it didn't work. So we concepted and prototyped a second version. And we did a third iteration and a fourth iteration. This is embarrassing. We eventually got up to version 9.0. That was really stupid. I should have killed it after 2.0 or maybe 3.0. If an idea isn't working, jettison it. It may just be that the more you love something, the more important it is to kill it and move on to something else. I don't know, but don't hold on to ideas too long. And finally, here we go. This is the best or maybe the worst idea you'll ever get, at least from me. And no one else said this. I'm to blame for this. I can sum it up in a single word. I desperately want you to fail. It's not because I'm jealous of your success or anyone's success. That's not it at all. If you try something new, I'll be your biggest booster. It's just that I believe with every fiber of my being that it's better to fail gloriously and to succeed in mediocrity. I've told my wife that should I have a tombstone someday, I want that on my tombstone. He failed gloriously. Just those two words, fail gloriously. A lot of people think I'm crazy when I say that. And I don't tend to say it to potential partners, and you probably shouldn't either. They don't always appreciate it. Even your team, I do say it to my team. I don't know what I'm thinking, but I really believe it. Why think small? Why just imitate other people? Why not strive for something new? The words "why not" should be a constant refrain for you and for your teams. The medium requires it. It needs it. We haven't got our Michelangelo yet. We don't even have our Citizen Kane yet. If you want to maximize creativity and truly innovate, you have to embrace failure. You even have to love it. So go out there and fail gloriously. To my mind, that's the real secret to innovation. And the one thing I hope you take from this talk. So thanks a lot. That's what I have to say. I hope you got something from it. And if you're interested, here are the materials I used in creating this talk. So I will tell you that Organizing Genius is the best book I've ever read about building a team that can do amazing, creative, innovative things. Creativity Inc. is about how Pixar does things. Creativity, a short and cheerful guide, is exactly what it says. It's a short guide to how to be creative. Oblique Strategies, I already tried to sell you on. Hope for Film, you heard too much from Ted Hope already. Disney Renaissance is an article that's about Glen Keane, an animation director, where he says lots of smart things. The Art of Innovation is about how one of the leading design firms in the world does its business. And Ignore Everybody is just a great book about what it takes to.
Hello, Warren.
Hey there.
That was a very inspiring talk. Thank you for joining us live. Is there something you want to add to the session?
Well, I realized after I finished that, and after talking to some folks yesterday, that I hadn't actually talked about how you convince people to let you do the wild and crazy things you want to do. So really briefly, convincing your corporate master is important, obviously. And there are a couple of strategies that I've used over the years. One is to, well, don't tell them. Roll your R&D effort to an existing product budget. If you're smart as a developer, you build yourself a little bit of a cushion, a slush fund, and you can find some money in there to work on your one new thing. Not a lot, but you can usually find some money in your development budget. You want to make sure you're always making money. If you're making money, that gives you a lot of freedom, obviously. You want to set those clear goals I was talking about. You want to tell your funders about that. I think tell them what you're trying to achieve at the high level, because a blank screen, an empty hard drive, and a blank check are not going to get you what you want. It makes people really nervous. So clear goals, clear high-level goals for your R&D effort. Always have a backup plan. I talked about that. Define success. I talked about that. Are you defining success as commercial success, artistic success, more patents for the company? Know what success means. And I just want to reiterate, find the one new thing. You just don't want to try too many. Innovation is hard and risky, so find one thing. Be incremental about it. Don't necessarily try to change the world, and unless you want a real possibility of failure. So that's all I wanted to say. I didn't talk about relationships with partners, so I thought that was important.
Thanks for the.
So there you go. Ready for questions.
So okay, we actually have a bunch. I don't know if we'll have time to go through all of them, but let's start. So could you please tell us what were some of your most glorious fails? Perhaps ones that you would like to be remembered for.
Oh my gosh. Well, I've started way more projects than I've finished. That's for sure. Either from a narrative standpoint, things weren't working. There's one game I worked on that I wouldn't put my name on, and I'm not going to tell you what it was because I was unhappy with the way it turned out. That one actually shipped. The biggest one was probably the version 9.0 failure. That was a failure on every level. The system didn't work. It was crazy. On Deus Ex, I've got a lot of these, by the way. I won't go into all of them. On Deus Ex, I designed a skill system that I thought was going to be so cool. And we prototyped it. And I had my brain trust, my outside the office brain trust, people I know well and respect their opinions and trust them to keep my secrets. They played it, and every one of them told me it was terrible. Um, luckily, it probably was literally 24 hours later. Harvey Smith, one of the people I've worked with many times, who is a way better designer than I ever was. He came up with a new one, a new skill system, which we in fact shipped. So those are a few of them.
Thanks for that. So another one, if you'd make Deus Ex today, what would it look like?
Interesting question. For one thing, the graphics would be a lot better. No one has ever accused me of making the prettiest games in the world. We did okay on Deus Ex, but and the art director probably hates me because I put such an emphasis on gameplay as opposed to the graphics. But I would make the graphics better. But the real answer is I probably wouldn't do Deus Ex again. I mean, I'd like to see a reboot. Just to be honest, I would love to see somebody take the game and just modernize it. But the reality is, so many games do what Deus Ex did now. I mean, it was 20 years ago, and maybe we were one of the earliest. I don't want to say the first, but one of the earliest games to combine genres the way we did, to come up with something new. But uh, there are lots of games that do that now, and so I'd rather do something new, look forward, not back.
Thank you. So could you give us some thoughts on innovation as the combination of invention and commercialization?
Well, intention is clearly part of it. You have to. I said you have to want it, and want it badly, because it's very hard, and it can kill you. I mean, I've always said, game development is either going to keep you young or kill you anyway. So wanting it is critical. Commercialization, I could care less. I'm going to ensure that I never work again here, but my only obligation to a funding partner is to sell one more copy of a game than to get someone to fund my next one. It'd be nice to have a huge hit. It'd be nice to sell 80 million copies or some crazy number. But the reality is, as long as I get to keep on making another one, I'm a happy guy. Nobody repeat that, and don't tell anybody, okay? You're the only ones who know that.
All right. So here's a couple more. So would you say that innovation within games, as the industry gets more mature, starts feeling more like evolutionary innovation rather than revolutionary innovation?
Yeah, clearly. I said that, we're still a relatively young medium. And I think we're more mature as a business than we are as an art form. But as budgets go up, it's clear that innovation becomes more and more difficult. I mean, even I've worked on some pretty big budget games, and it's very hard to want to risk someone else's money on something revolutionary. The thing is, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I mean, first, that I get to make games at all, but also I got into making games at a time when nobody knew anything. We were making it up as we went along, and when nobody knows anything and you're making things up, it's a lot easier to make something that really changes things, that has great influence. Now I think evolution is probably a good idea, and that's kind of implied by my statement about one new thing. One new thing in the context of a relatively conventional game may not change the world, but it'll push it just a little bit further, And every time we push something a little bit further, we're doing well, doing right by the medium.
Thank you. And the last question for today. So in big AAA studios, it's common to have a lot of people with different backgrounds and different likes. You were saying that a director should nudge towards the box. How do you deal with situations where some employees have conflicting preferences or ideas and push in different directions?
Great question. There are two answers. One is someone. It almost doesn't matter who it is. Someone has to have one more vote than everybody else combined. And sometimes, as rarely as possible, you have to say no. I mean, there was a movement on, well, I will give a specific example. There was a movement of several people on the team on Epic Mickey to create a magic system. And I just didn't want magic in the game. The game was focused on drawing and erasing, filling in geometry and characters and making them disappear. That was the one new thing in my mind in that game. And I thought that having a magic system would just confuse things and make people focus less on the new thing. So on that one, I just had to say no. The other answer is, if people aren't on board, I'm not saying fire them, but they'll realize it, and if they're smart, they'll leave. Try picturing a company where you're working on an epic fantasy role-playing game and a modern-day ninja game with John Woo, and one day you come back to your team and you say, "Hey, folks, we're making a Mickey Mouse game." That doesn't always go over really well. So I lost my at that time best level builder. He said, I can't do this, and he left. And I lost my lead writer, who said, I can't find that voice. I don't have a Disney voice, and he left too. And it was the right thing for the project. It was the right thing for them. It was the right thing for everybody. So sometimes, if people really aren't on board, it's best if they're not part of the team. It's painful, but that's the right thing to do.
Understood.
Wow, I sound like a real jerk.
And just one very last one, and let's make this like a 1-minute answer. What advice would you give?
I can't even say hello in 1 minute.
What advice would you give to a
go
game design student?
Well, three things. Make games. Prove that you can finish something. The biggest problem with students is they come to me with partial projects or incomplete things. Finish something. Prove that you're a finisher. Have a life. The easiest way not to get a job with me is to say, I just play games all the time. That's what I do. No, get out of here. And don't ignore the humanities. It's great. You need to have some engineering under your belt. You need to have some art under your belt, but you never know what you're going to need to know to be a designer. I've had to know how a medieval castle works on a day-to-day basis. I've needed to know how World War I aircraft flew and what the difference is between a radial and an inline engine. You never know what you're going to need to know. So history, economics, behavioral psychology. Economics and psychology are kind of what we do in a weird sort of way. So don't just make games and learn the things that you think you need to make games, especially for designers. Branch out and don't ignore the humanities.
That's a great advice. Warren, thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure to listen to you and to have you here live. And hopefully next time we'll be able to do it in person. Thank you very much.
I hope so. That would be great. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.